Have you ever wondered why some apocalyptic worlds feel like cheap movie sets and others feel like they have a real and breathing history? Like you could actually step inside and feel the grit of the dust, hear the strange quiet of a world that moved on without us. And it's all in how you tell the story. Today, I'm going to show you how to use the clash between permanent, unforgiving ink and wild, unpredictable watercolor to build a post-apocalyptic world that feels truly alive, that has the permanence of human civilization and the unpredictability of its end. And this isn't just a painting tutorial, it's a lesson in environmental storytelling. We're not just making a pretty picture of the end of the world, we're going to design and build a world with a soul, the place we're calling Neo-Umaria. By the end of this, you'll see how the very materials that we use can tell a story of stark endings and chaotic, beautiful new beginnings. Hello adventurers and welcome back to the Red Quills, and today I'm actually diving back in time. About 7 or 8 months ago, I did a commission. Before I got my fancy new desk set up and I was still working in the old method on the black piece of cloth that I used for all of my filming, I did a commission of the city of Neo-Umaria. And at the time, I really enjoyed what we were doing. It was actually a sequel to another map that I've done in the history of this series. And it told the history of a world that moved on without us. Something from the Cloud Empress TTRPGs. And if you're interested in that kind of thing, you can check it out. You want to check out the original map, you can find it in the link here. But otherwise, what I'm going to be doing today is starting a new series, a series which discusses how to create maps of a particular style to match the genre of your TTRPG. Over the course of the history of this channel, we've talked about methods and histories and kinds of maps that you can use, how to involve puzzles and codes and different styles of dungeons and cities. But today I really want to address the fact that not all of us have campaigns that are of a genre that need the traditional fantasy map. If we're running a map that requires a bit of horror, a bit of, cozy fantasy, a bit of post-apocalyptic worlds, then we need a style that reflects that. And so this commission, which I haven't shown before on the channel, was the perfect example of that. And it's what we're going to be using to kick off this series. So strap in if this genre series sounds like it's going to be of use to you. If you are interested in some of the topics coming up, or if you have your own genre of TTRPG campaign that you want me to address in a style of map, then stick it in the comments below. But otherwise, like and subscribe, and we're going to head off to start the new series right now. The core idea here is simple, but really powerful. We're mashing together two mediums that are basically opposites. The ink is our past. It's the harsh, unchangeable truth of what was lost. The lines are permanent and structural. They're the concrete skeletons of skyscrapers, the twisted metal of bridges, the final brutal facts of the world that ended. Then you have watercolor. And watercolor is chaos, it's life, it's nature. It bleeds and blossoms and moves in ways that you can't always predict. It's the perfect medium to show the relentless, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying force of nature taking back what's hers. It's the moss cracking through the pavement, the flash of a mutated flower, the rust weeping down the side of a forgotten machine, and together they create this visual argument. It's a constant push and pull between order and chaos, between life and death, the rigid past and the fluid present. That conflict, that tension, is what makes a world like Neo-Umaria feel real. It gives history, it gives a future, and today we can bring that city to life. And we'll start, as all worlds do, with a plan. Before a single drop of ink or color hits the paper, we need to think like world builders, not just artists. The story of our piece starts right here, with the choices that we make before we even begin. So first up, our tools. As usual, I am selecting a large A2 sheet of 180 GSM watercolor paper. I have a large spiral-bound book that I tend to use for this. It tears out to be A2, and I find that it works very, very well for both ink and watercolor. When you are using your ink specifically, you want to be choosing a brand of pen that interacts with the watercolor in a specific way. And I'm not saying that you need a brand of ink that doesn't bleed into the watercolor, although that is of course handy if you want sharp lines. As long as you know what the pen does, you can use it to the greatest effect. However, many brands of pen will bleed when they come in contact with the watercolor, or you will need to make sure that the paper is absolutely dry before you use them so that you don't get any mixture between the two. However, if you can adjust for that and choose a style that has the bleed is a little bit fuzzy, then that works too. So I'm using a variety of different thicknesses of pens, from a 0.6 on the outskirts down to a 0.4, a 0.2, a 0.1, and a 0.05. And between the varying thicknesses of these different pens, I can get the feeling of moving from large-scale structures down to small-scale structures. It's great for long-distance isometric views of things like I'm doing in this particular map, because the thick pen seems to hold a lot of details, and using the thinner pens for stippling and a little bit of chaos gives the impression of having a lot of detail without actually needing to stick it down specifically. So we need to trick the eye into thinking that we're seeing a lot of detail, when actually we're just being careful about where we put some mess. Speaking of mess, that brings us to the watercolors. I've got a simple palette here. You don't really need 100 colors. And the story of Neo Yomaria is all about the contrast. So I have the green tones in the nature, the vibrant, almost unnatural pops of color within this dead city, and a few darker colors around the outside, and a few pops of strange otherworldly glows in the machines that I'm doing on the exterior is going to really push that somber alienness of the world that has left. It's not the one that we currently remember. It's a little bit more advanced than that. Because as per the request, what I'm doing is, for this commission, is creating some designs, names, and a bit of lore for the animalistic servitors of the ancient civilization. The old robots that provided for the city and its people in a variety of ways, and now patrol the corridors and protect it. So then you can, like in certain post-apocalyptic games that are currently popular, you can have them be the enemies while still fulfilling a function within the world itself. So I'm also thinking about where to put the little narrative focal points, the small details that will hint at a bigger story. It could be makeshift bridges or little repairs, which could suggest survivors or people currently living within it. Zones where strange cybernetic beasts are known to patrol. We're not just drawing the buildings and caverns here. We're creating the landmarks that can make the world feel lived in and full of stories. The composition should take the viewer on a journey through this history. We're setting the stage for a tragedy, but also for a story of survival. All right, now we can commit. We can get started. I'm, of course, beginning with the sketch, the idea of the outline of what is going to be the bones of this city. And from that point, my task is to give it more detail, not just aesthetically and visually, but in terms of the world building as well. I'm going to develop a set of names, a bit of a linguistic history, and answer a few more of the practical questions about how the city is laid out. And if you want more details on how to lay out a city, you can find some of the other videos that I have on the playlist specifically about creating city maps. But for now, we're just addressing the style of making a post-apocalyptic map. So those kinds of questions you can find in those videos. All right, so the first thing they're going to do is I'm going to paint the servitors around the exterior of the city. I've got 4 of them, and they're my opportunity to give much more character to the ancient civilization. Now, when you create your own maps of post-apocalyptic landscapes, you don't necessarily need to include these servitors. These are something that's specifically for this world. But the idea that we have clues in the borders, not just here, but later on, when I add the border that has a code, a symbology, and phrasing, that will add a little bit more to the lore of what can be found in the city. The idea is that your map isn't just a map to the physical locations. It's a map to the history and the culture and the society that they're trying to find more about as they venture into the world and use the map. But in this case, I'm going to paint the servitors. I'm going to start with the watercolors to begin with, lighter colors and going into darker colors. Each of them has their own pattern of lights that can be used to identify them in the dark. They all have their own colors. They're all based on different animals. They all serve a slightly different function. I'm going to write the names of them and the functions of them in the same code as the border that I'll paint later on. So between the two of them, you could theoretically use them to decipher one another. But we'll see if that kind of gets figured out by the players themselves. And once I've done the servitors, I can move on to the city itself. Whilst the ruin is the more permanent part of the map, what we want to look at first is the watercolor. Because it works in the water, if you put the ink first and it is water porous, and most ink is, then use the watercolors after that, it will make the ink run. So you generally need to paint the watercolors first, give a fairly specific impression of the shape of the buildings that they're growing on. And then you can adjust if you've made any alterations or if you see a better shape for things. But along with the foliage, you want to start doing the labels as well. I'm going to be using a 0.2 millimeter black Fineliner pen in order to do that. And I'm going to use a font which will broadly suggest the same lettering as the codes, because I want there to be some similarities between the two of them without giving away how to solve the code itself. So the O's, the M's, and a few of the stemmed letters are roughly the same shapes, so that you can draw a parallel between them aesthetically and lore-wise. As you go through and you paint out the foliage, I find that it's important to ask how it got in there. Is it, altered by mutations, by the radiation itself? Are there any places that are open to the sky? In this particular case, the city is underground. It's in the caverns, as you can see. And the world that we're working in, the platform for the TTRPG, is Cloud Empress, which is actually based on the Studio Ghibli film Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind, which I love. And when I did the original version of the map, and it was a lot in caves, I really liked how you could use the natural environment the same way that they did, in the way that, fungi and crystals can absorb a lot of the radiation and the pollution from the air, so that nature is tidying up from the mistakes of the past. And I really wanted to make those themes come together in this particular map as well, so that you can see that nature is fixing the mistakes of the past, but they are permanent mistakes. Even if they're being repaired, the scars will always be there. And I think that that is a very important theme of any setting for a post-apocalyptic campaign. Once the nature and the labels has been done, we can go in with our pens. And now we're committing. This is the part where the story of the old world gets written in that permanent ink. And every line that we will draw from here on out is a final statement. There's no erasing. That unforgiving quality is exactly what makes ink the perfect medium to show the stark reality of the apocalypse. It demands confidence, but we can use that to our advantage. Don't be afraid of the permanence. Embrace it. Every shaky line, every accidental slip can become another part of the city's ruined history. So I'm going to start with my thickest pen, the 0.6. I'm going to focus on the big stuff. These are the sides of the skyscrapers, the foreground, the outsides of the caverns. And you can see when I do some of the cavern exteriors that I am breaking the shape of them up so that most of them have that very rough natural line that reminds the eye that it is a natural cavern that has been carved out. But I'm breaking it up with broad geometric strokes that look like buildings, as if we're looking down through the stone into these different pockets of air. I wanted to have that feeling that you can have an isometric view while still being an underground city. And I think it turned out rather well. Now I'm going to switch to a finer pen. This is going to be the 0.4, and I'm going to move to the mid-ground. The lines will get thinner. They'll be less defined. These are the interior shapes. So if the thick line is the exterior shape, the thinner line, the 0.4, is going to be the interior shapes. And this is sort of the shapes that aren't on the outside as you look at it, but do define the shape overall. If you have a cube and the exterior is a sort of diamond shape, the interior lines are the sides of the cube. Because after that, we come in with the 0.2, the 0.1. They're going to be the finer details. So that's the windows, the doors, the pipes and ropes, and the various bits and pieces that fill out how we can recognize and differentiate the different buildings from one another. They don't change the overall shape of the buildings, but they will give them a little bit more history and character to differentiate. And you can drop in some little narrative breadcrumbs here. You can draw faded logos of corporations. I've got a couple of billboards, several silos which once stored food, a lot of containers that moved the various fluids throughout the city. little pipelines and walkways and scaffolding pieces that will give the world a bit more history and detail. One of the hardest things when you're starting out is knowing when to stop. And it's a real balancing act, because a lot of the time, if you're starting out, this will take a lot more time than you think it will, because you really want it to be over with, and a lot of the broad details can be finished very quickly, and you think the whole thing, therefore, can be done at the same kind of pace. But in order to really make it feel complete, it's not just about spending a lot of time on the whole thing, it's knowing where to focus, where you want the detail to be. And generally speaking, what you want is to draw the eye by adding detail. In the places where you don't want them to look, don't worry about it, don't add details. But in this particular case, that's, the gaps between the various caverns. But within the caverns themselves, I need to put a great deal of time and effort into filling it out so it looks real, so that when the eye does look there, and it will be drawn there by the contrast and the darkness and the different shapes and shadings and colors, then they have something to look at, and it's satisfying, and it keeps the eye there. Which brings us to the smallest pen, the 0.05 millimeter. And I'm going to be using that to do some shading, some stippling and cross-hatching to give it more texture and more detail and a three-dimensionality that will complement the isometric style that I've chosen here. So the city is then built. The story of its fall and rebirth has been told in some broad strokes. Now we zoom in. And this is where we add that last 10% of detail that makes the whole piece just pop and feel alive. We need to slow down here, be more deliberate, add sharp little notes of contrast that make everything else sing. So I'm going to go back with the finest pen, as I mentioned, and by this time the watercolor has to be completely dry, I mean bone dry. If you try to ink over the damp paper, even if you have a pen that doesn't bleed, the pen will just tear up the paper and make it look a bit more messy. And we're not adding new buildings here. We can't work these lines into natural chaos. What we want to do is enhance that, adding some superfine textures, a few delicate lines for some wood grains or some dirt on the floor, some soil on the side of a building, some rust down the edges of a pipe, some light stippling on the concrete to give it more grip. And most importantly, I'm using the ink to redefine some of the edges that have gotten soft from the watercolor. If you have a thicker pen and where you've made corners it looks a little bit rounded, you can come in with a thin pen and create that harsh line, that harsher corner, and that pop of detail. That'll make it feel a much more immersive. And then I'm going to come in with the highlights. So we've got our shadows and our midtones, but as you saw when I did the robots earlier on, in addition to having the watercolors and the line work that I used to make it really pop and sing, I came in with a white out pen, a correction pen, which is basically just a great way of adding white color to your maps. And you can have it create some stippling, some light, draw the eye to particular areas, or even just create some more textures alongside the thin pen that you use to create the shading in the last part. And with that, we're done. There it is, Neo-Eumaria. It's not just a painting of a ruined city, it's a world designed from a story. It's a world where the unforgiving lines of the past are being eaten by the chaotic, beautiful colors of a new beginning, where every texture, every color choice, every single mark is a sentence in that story. That's the power of mixing two mediums like this. That's the contrast that we can really, really use, not only in monochrome versus multichrome, between shading and lights, between that darkness and that brightness. You can have that represent a world post-apocalyptic, which is not necessarily the kind of, dark, gritty post-apocalypse that we might have seen from, certain movies, but something that contains hope for the future, that shows a balance that has been struck, unwilling or not, between civilization and nature over the cycle of history. So I really hope that you give this technique a try, and you don't have to make Neo-Eumaria yourself. You can create your own world. You can tell its own unique story of this collapse and the reclamation. What was lost? What strange new beauty is growing in its place? And if you make something, please share it with me on social media or on the Discord. The link is in the description below. I'll be so excited to see the worlds that you bring to life. Now, this was a commission, and as such, it's not available for download on the Patreon, but I do have some tidbits there in any case that you can check out. If you want to join the community on Discord or on Patreon, you are very, very welcome to do so. I come out with new posts twice a week on YouTube with tidbits on the Patreon as well. I chat with the Discord. We take up challenges. We're making a community map making challenge to come up over the next few weeks. You can check that out there as well. Now, over the next following few videos, because this was just an introduction to the kind of concept where I wanted to check out how people felt about doing genres, I have prepared a few more maps as well. We're going to be looking at horror, we're going to be looking at cozy fantasy, grimdark stuff, and pirates, because I thought that they would be an interesting one. Using what I have learned over the last year since I've done those maps to try to make them a bit better and a bit more interesting for everyone. And of course, I'm going to be using a different medium for each. So I'm going to talk about how you can use different artistic styles to show the different genres of your campaign and how you can make it really, really easy for yourself in a way that's approachable. It doesn't require, you know, you to sit down and do an art degree or anything. It needs some simple tools and a little bit of patience. That was the intention of this particular series. And if you have a genre, as I said before, stick it in the comments. If you like this video, give it a like, give us a subscribe if you're interested, and check out the paired videos that come out on the Thursdays of the week. I come out with these videos. They are all about, you know, creating maps, answering particular questions, doing different styles of things. And on the Sundays, I come out with a really quick map series, and they are much, much smaller. They're not really the artistic standpoints, but they're all about the theory of creating layers for monsters in your TTRPGs, how to use the environment and use the stat blocks and abilities and laws together to create a challenge. So if that interests you, check that out. Otherwise, I want to thank the communities that I have on Patreon and the Discord. I couldn't do this without you guys. If you want to support me, I would really appreciate it. You can go onto the Patreon and check that out, or become a member on YouTube for early access to these videos. But in any case, I will let you go, and I will see you next week for the continuation of this with our map of Revenos in a grim, dark genre. I'll see you then, but until then, happy map making. And it's not difficult to